Chart Tommy Broughan.
Minister, I know you replied, I think, on the DEIS issue at the last education question, but a number of concerns in our own constituency, in particular in relation to St David's Boys National School in Artane and St Joseph's in Fairview. And a lot of confusion, I think, Minister, around the criteria. I heard yourself last can, for example, on the previous round, raising questions about the index that you use in order to establish what areas are JESH and what areas are JESH 1, JESH 2. So I'd like you to address that now, if possible. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I have tried to. I'm sure you heard the other responses. Just the first thing is to say that what we've done is try to identify 79 schools who are brought in for the first time, the most disadvantaged schools who are completely outside, 30 schools who are within it at Urban Band 2 and uplift them to Urban Band 1. I think the Deputy will acknowledge that 3 of those schools was in his own area, and 1 of the schools at post-primary is in the Deputy's area. So 4 of the schools were in in the constituency. That's probably better than average. In terms of the way this is done, what we've tried to do is move away from the old system, which was randomly collected by principals. They looked at things like medical cards, random information that was collected. Some schools didn't apply at all. Some schools had very bad data and were left out. So what we're doing is data that is incontrovertible. So we're sourcing it from the CSO. We're using the children enrolled in the school to track back to the, if you like, the profile of the areas, the small areas, 50 houses, typically a street from which they come. And that's the way it's done, and it's being applied evenly. I recognise that it has to be refined, but it is a very good first stab at something that's objective. We're letting through 79 plus 30, and we will look at this process again. It has the advantage, this model, that we can track a school and its changes of its demographic profile, its social need profile. So that allows us to try and be responsive to schools whose profile is changing.
Deputy Broughan.
Thanks, Minister. But I mean, there still seem to be glaring inconsistencies. I mentioned 2 of the schools in our own constituency, St Joseph's and St David's, and in the case of St Joseph's, you'd have children coming from, I know it would be the adjoining areas of Dublin Central, but where clearly the model, the index would seem to indicate that school should have JESH 1, and likewise in St David's, where you would find that the adjoining school is a JESH school, and yet it seems to have been excluded. So there does seem to be inconsistency. I know you launched the programme in Darrendale in our constituency, and there's a long tradition, as you know, of major programmes being launched in that particular parish, going back over 20 years. And it was welcome, obviously, that Art School La Salle, School Katrina and so on were included. But there does seem major inconsistencies. Are you hindered, Minister, by the lack of funding still? Because although you announced an additional 5 million, looking back again, and you had this in the previous debate, that the 2015 figure we had, we still haven't equalled that. We still seem to have lower money being spent on JESH than was spent in 2015.
Well, just to reassure that it's not the catchment of the school. It's the individual children and where they're drawn from. So a school could be in a catchment but drawing its children from a different catchment, and that will be picked up. So it looks at the actual individual child and sources back, if you like, to the street they live. That's the model it's used. So it's being applied fairly. There's no question of unfair treatment, and a school can seek a review. It picked up, as I say, 3 in our area, 30 nationwide schools that were uplifted, and that reflected they were at the highest level of disadvantage and they weren't being recognised in that category. In terms of resource, yes, I'd put resource, whatever, 15 million in a full year is going into this, but I think it's worth also recalling that I'm putting 54 million into upgrading resource teaching, which goes to schools The new approach with those 900 extra teachers will be going to schools where there's the highest level of learning need. So we're not just approaching this through the DEIS model, we're also through the resource teaching model. And the objective that I'm setting is to get to the child with the greatest need, through both models. And I'm also trying to pilot new approaches so that schools like the one in Darndale that we were there, who's doing really interesting things, have built clusters for the improved teaching of children, that those sort of cluster building would be encouraged and good practice would be shared. And we're trying to do much wider things than just listing the school number.
Yeah, well, I welcome that. I mean, clearly, I think we've seen over programmes directed, additional resources directed at the lowest socio-economic areas in terms of income and resources, that we have had some benefits, and people staying in second level and then going on to third level. But there are some areas where third level access is still very poor because the children don't get a good enough start. But the Haas-Praxia index of deprivation, are you going to continue? You said something that in a previous debate that you might be reviewing the use of that index down to September. And is it the case that the issues that you raised yourself, Lascan, for County Donegal, and other deputies raised around the House and for our own area, Minister, is it possible, therefore, that during the summer that you'll be able to add to the list? I think we're up to, is it 830 or so schools at the moment nationwide, and that you can pick up on anomalies such as St David's Boys National School and the Boys School in Fairview, that they will definitely be included, because the current criteria has, I think, unfairly omitted them.
Final response, 1 minute.
Yeah, I mean, just to acknowledge that there has been very good improvement. The progression rate in disadvantaged schools at second level, it was 68%, which was 32% dropout, and that's gone down to 17. So there's been really, and we want to bring that down to 10. That's our objective under this plan. I suppose the issue of the level of inclusion, and at the moment we have about 19% of pupils in total are in the various disadvantaged area programmes. What we need to do, I think, over the long term is to make sure that resource in this area has an impact, and that so we need to refine the model, and that's not mean abandon that index approach, but perhaps add new elements to it if that's deemed necessary. But I don't think anyone could doubt that the 79 schools who are at the highest level of disadvantage on this measure were entitled to be brought in as a first step. So we will look at subsequent steps, and we'll try to refine and improve the interventions within the school as well as designation. So it's to try and get this as a more dynamic model. And hopefully we'll see schools progressing out of DEIS status as well as schools coming in.
We move on now.